Warning. If you're not a fan of language that packs a punch, now's the time to tune out. But if you're ready for some real talk, stick around and enjoy the ride. All right. And so today I'm so excited to be talking. That sounds weird. I shouldn't start saying I'm so excited to be talking about racism in the workplace. Okay, let me rephrase it.
I can't wait to talk about this super painful thing.
What I should say is I'm excited to be having these insightful conversations about the topic racism in the workplace. It's something we don't talk about enough. We need to talk about it. And we really need to normalize having these kinds of conversations, because otherwise, like, you're just dealing with it on your own, and who needs that? I don't want that toxicity inside me. So
no, that's where white supremacy flourishes, is in this like secrecy, and nobody talks about it, and you just assume you've misread the situation or whatever. Like, no, that's white 100%, supremacy.
You're right.
Whacking you upside your head. Exactly. I'm also very just in awe of today's guest. I'm so glad you found her on the internet and she agreed to be friends with us. So our guest today is Dr. Tolu Wuraola, and she is a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert, consultant, attorney, fantastically wonderful and beautiful person. I mean, amazing. Her skin was just like glowing like the moon. Okay. So beautiful. Yes.
We'll have to have a part 2 where we ask her for her skincare regimen.
Right? Like, what is this night serum? What is happening here? We need to know.
I just love the fact that in our day and age, you can meet someone on the internet and have such an amazing connection and never meet them in person. So this will be my first time talking with her in person. So I love this. I love it. I'm very excited about it.
Yes, it's going to be a great conversation.
I agree.
Let's do it.
My name is Tramelle D Jones, and I am a strategic career coach.
I am Bonnie Scott. I'm a licensed professional counselor in Texas.
For women and marginalized communities, work is hard.
Especially at this point in the pandemic and in our lives.
There's such a toxic workplace in most jobs.
Or you're bringing your own trauma history and making decisions from that place.
From the experiences that we're both having individually, now we get to join forces and help the world not have to go through those same pitfalls, right?
We're going to do it with kindness and love for each other and all the women out there doing this hard stuff.
Welcome to the Work and Wellness Podcast. I believe that the first form of respect is how you pronounce a person's name. So I'd like for you to pronounce your name for me so that I have that point of reference and I say it correctly.
Okay. My name is Dr. Tolu Wuraola.
Wuraola.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So you and I cannot remember the moment we met.
Yeah.
Right? I don't remember how it happened. I was trying to explain to Bonnie. I was like, she's my internet friend. I don't remember. So Bonnie, this is my internet friend.
Nice to meet you, Bonnie.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you so much for being with us.
Sure.
Yeah. So, I told Tramelle that I looked at your website as we were kind of getting ready, and you straight up are like the most beautiful, smartest model that I've ever seen, like, in the world. And so I was like, she's too beautiful and smart. Like, I can't talk to this woman. And Tramelle was like, no, we're going to be fine.
It is too early for that, girl.
You're gorgeous. I hope that you know that about yourself.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm very flattered by that.
You are rocking it. I love the lipstick. That's usually the color that I portray as well. But today I came here just giving you all this rawness.
It's my favorite. I just feel like violet and magenta, in addition to red, but violet and magenta in those wine-colored tones really are good for my complexion. So, like when they say when you find something that works for you, you just stick with it, right? And so I have like every shade that you can think of from here to here of this particular color. And so anytime I go places and people are like, well, what's that color? I'm like, girl, it's like 5 different things. All right. So I wish I could tell you.
This is a custom color that I could.
It's custom. I have to steal that. This is custom.
No, I love it. And The thing about your Instagram feed is I don't see a lot of your face.
That's
You're
true.
not making a lot of personal appearances.
That's true.
I think the reason is because you are such a mirror and making people reflect on themselves in that feed. I think that's probably the reason why. Because there's a lot happening.
Well, you know, I'm happy, but I'm also curious whether or not maybe I should be showing my face more in that space. One of the reasons why I really stick to just the black and white posts with the text is that I'm hoping that the Instagram account there can serve as a resource. So I don't know if you've noticed that there's like these tabs on the side with like the topic.
Yep.
And I want it to be the kind of place where if someone's going through something, particularly Black women, because the site is aimed towards Black women, I want them to be able to scroll and go, okay, imposter syndrome. I'm feeling that today. What does, this sister know about imposter syndrome? What about, white institutional spaces? What about human resources? Just all of those different topics. I want people to be able to use it as a resource. And so I haven't personalized it that much in terms of my physical presence there. I also think that there's going to be a moment where I'm going to step away from that space. And so I don't want people to get stuck on the person
associated with you.
Exactly. Yeah. Maybe even pass it on to somebody else, right? And so I think that the way that you can see my personality come out the most is in the captions and in the stories. Because I come in and I show up as the full Black woman that I am, right? I use my slang, I use my, AAVE, and I want folks to get used to the idea of a Black woman who's smart, but also Black. Right? Because for so many people, those two seem like opposing concepts. And so I want people to understand.
There.
Yeah, I want people to understand that I can come in here and be honey child and this and everything that we do. And what I'm saying is also something that's profound, is something that's accurate, it's something that's well researched, et cetera, et cetera. So
I love that.
Thank you.
Hey friends, I'm Tramelle. If you didn't know, I run a career planning firm called TDJ Consulting. I focus on working with high achieving women, and you know exactly the ones I'm talking about. She's the go-to employee, she's consistent, she's reliable, and everyone goes to her for help. It usually means that she's doing her work and theirs too. But unfortunately, her bank account doesn't reflect all the extra effort that she's putting in. I help those high achieving women leverage their wins at work to boost their salary by $10,000 to $20,000. I provide career services that build on those successes that they've already accomplished without requiring them to go back to school. If you're curious, let's talk. Schedule a free call at tdjconsulting.com. So since we are internet friends,
yes,
and we haven't had a time to just kind of express what got us to the moments where we are now, I would love to hear about your background. Because what I know of you right now is that, of course, you are running this feed on Instagram, but that is only a byproduct of all the amazing things that you are doing out in the world.
Yes.
Right? I know that you're doing some consulting. We know that you are a lawyer.
Yes.
We know that you have your hands in the diversity and inclusion world. Talk to us about the progression. How did you get there?
Oh God, that's such a good question. So I'm not a practicing attorney anymore, but I did start my career off as an attorney. Those first, 3-4 years of being someone fresh out of law school, had done the whole high school, undergrad, law school, went through the whole school thing, and being out in the world for the first time as a young Black professional person, right? And even though I loved the field, right, the actual work itself, the writing, the being in court, the arguing, the debating, all that stuff, I actually hated my life as a lawyer. There was something about the office politics and the conventions of those spaces that didn't agree well with me. Or let me put it the other way, because the other way is actually the most accurate way how it worked. There was something about me that didn't agree with those spaces. So I found myself being in those spaces where I think And, obviously this is only from my perspective. I've only ever lived in my body, so I don't know what other people were perceiving. But the way I perceived my experience, it was that I was this, young Black woman. I'm going to go with what I've been told. So bear with me. I hate to talk about myself like this, but young, Black, attractive, smart, sure of herself. And for some people, that's just a lot. And I think that some of the cultural scripts around being Black and woman, I defied a lot of those scripts. And I think that, what people like is for folks to come into different spaces and they can easily peg you for what they think you are. And then whatever cultural script they feel like matches who they think you are, that's what they use, right? And so there are these ideas of what a Black man is, or what a professional Black man is, maybe what a tall professional Black man might be, right? Maybe he was an athlete, maybe he, all these different assumptions that people make about the body that you're showing up in. The boxes
people want to put us in.
The boxes that people want to put you in. And I think because I was this Black woman, and because of my African ethnicity, right? Both my parents are African, so I'm not African American, I'm Nigerian American. But culturally, I see myself as African American. But I show up in these spaces with these features, with this foreign name, and I think they're like, we don't know what to do with this. And so it's challenging. And when people are in that position, they don't have like this quick go-to, like that snap decision response to what they think you are, it makes it hard for them. And so, I essentially got my ass kicked up and down those law firms, girl. And it was hell. And I had to leave it. I had to, it wasn't a matter of, well, let me leave this firm and go to another firm. Okay, I don't like the culture of this particular firm. Let me leave here and go to another firm. I had been at 3 firms in 3 years. And so it wasn't anything about that unique culture. It was something about me. And anywhere I went, I knew that that was going to be coming with me. And so I decided to leave it altogether. I left the profession. One of the cool things that made it easy for me to leave the profession was that I didn't have the student loans that comes with it. And so many of my colleagues who've had similar experiences, either, as Black women or, as some other identity, they felt stuck in that place because they were saddled with these student loans and et cetera. And I was just, I'm out of here. Right? I'm out of here.
Freedom there.
Yes. And so I left the profession entirely. But, it's one of those things where it becomes such a huge part of your identity. I always feel like an attorney. I still process and understand things with my attorney, training. And so, it's still there. But in terms of being a person who goes into a law firm every day, I know I didn't want to ever do that again. I used to wear a relaxer, right? And the minute I walked out of the last law firm, I went and got my hair cut and went back to my natural hair. Right? Because that was a part of the performance, right? That was the part of going into these spaces and massaging yourself into this identity that they want you to be, that feels more palatable, more easy to get along with, easy to make sense of.
Yes, I love that too. Yeah.
So,
and really what I'm hearing from you, and I hope other people hear this, right? You have identified what it is that's holding you back, and you had the bravery to get out of that. And I really hope that people hear that. It's okay. You can move away. And even those women who are dealing with the burden of student loans, there is still a pathway for you to get out of that if you need it. So I love that you're sharing. So I hope people hear that.
Thank you for elevating that, because one of the things that I love about your posts is that while you recognize the challenges that come with, being Black, being woman, being whomever in different spaces, there's still this very optimistic outlook that you have in your post where you're like, girl, you don't have to put up with that. Let's get you something. Let's look at that resume. Let's fix up that resume. Let's get you somewhere, and I love that, because I think
quit that job.
Quit that job. Quit that job, because I know that job is killing you. Quit that job. And there are a lot of people who are stuck in these jobs, which, you obviously can't blame them, right? Folks got bills, folks need healthcare, folks got kids. You know, these are all things that are important and they're real, right? And so, you know, I think one of the things that people don't recognize is that you got to have a plan, you got to have a strategy, you got to have some kind of vision for what you want for yourself. And we just get so stuck again because of the student loans and because of the other obligations where we don't see that. And so I think it's so critical for internet spaces like yours that are saying, no, you can do it. There's a process, but you can do it. Right?
Yeah. Thank you for that compliment. I appreciate it.
Yes. I didn't know that. I got on a plane and I moved to Los Angeles. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a strategy. I just needed to get out of there.
People have plans, some people have dreams.
Yeah.
It's all right.
Yeah, I just needed to get out of there. And so I wanted a change of scenery, moved to Los Angeles, probably bummed around here for like a year, and then thought to myself, okay, you got to get serious about what you're going to do with yourself next, right? What's going to be your chapter 2? And so, you know, I had always wanted to go into education. And so I got into teaching. I taught algebra to 9th graders at Compton down in South LA. Yeah. And it was, it was one of those things where, you know, people would ask me, you know, how do I compare being a lawyer to being a teacher? And, you know, I felt like there was a certain kind of rigor that came with being a lawyer, right? Because, you know, we're talking about courts, we're talking about contracts, you know, there's just so much at stake. Not that children aren't at stake, right? Not that education isn't at stake, but there's just this very formal system that you really have to fit into to be able to perform in that arena. For me, I felt like teaching was less about the rigor, even though that was important to me. It was more about resilience and kind of like running a marathon, right? And so, you know, being a lawyer is like a sprint, right? You know, it's just this high, fast-paced thing that you're just doing, you know, day to day, and it's quick and it's going by really fast. There are these deadlines, you got filings, you have trials, you have all these things. Being a teacher, you've got these kids and they've got these needs in addition to their educational needs. They've got these, you know, outside classroom needs. You need to show up for them in ways. You need to be able to, you know, come back every day with a smile, be able to come back every day, you know, still optimistic that you can get through today, right? You guys weren't able to grasp this concept yesterday. Let's try it again today, right? And so it was something that I really loved. And I really thought that that was going to be my second career, right? And then I had met some folks from UCLA's urban schooling program. And I thought that what they were doing was just so cool, right? They were really, you know, in addition to giving us the tangible lessons for teaching, they were also trying to reframe our thinking about how to even look at these children, right? Because a lot of, you know, schooling in the United States takes this deficit lens of Black and brown kids, right? So the idea of, well, they can't get it because they're bad, or they can't get it because they're dumb, well, they can't get it because their parents don't care. And all of these, you know, again, cultural scripts, right? These cultural scripts that many of us buy into because that's all we're taught. And we go into those classes and we have these negative impacts on kids because if you don't see them as children with futures, with possibilities, who have the potential, what good is your teaching, right? What good is your teaching? What good is your lesson plan if you're not seeing these kids, right? And so I was like, girl, what's this? I want to do that, right? I was like, what is that? I want to be a part of that. And so I was encouraged to apply to the PhD program at UCLA's Graduate School of Education. I got in and I worked on my doctorate for the next 7 years. And in the process of working on my doctorate, that's where I got that really formal, rigorous training around race and racism and institutions and bias. And I just think that it was not only the best education that I ever got. For me, it was actually transformational to be able to get the kind of training that, you know, because we have our lived experiences. A lot of us know how to articulate what those experiences look like, but I don't know if people really understand that there are several different academic disciplines that are committed to making sense, right? To looking at the research, to creating empirical data around these experiences, right? And so, you know, there's this sense that, well, I know race. I know how to talk about race. I have a race. I got a race. I can talk about race. And it's not like that, right? It's a lot more academic than that, right? And it's not to say that it diminishes or minimizes people's experiences, but it's also to say that just as seriously as we take medicine or physics, we have to take these fields that look at race and racism and exclusion and all of these different processes within our society that create the type of marginalized groups and produce the types of outcomes that we see among marginalized groups. After I left UCLA, I knew that I didn't want to go the normal tenure track route, essentially because my daughter was like, that thing that you do, I don't like that. You need to play with me. And I knew that if I did the tenure track thing, that I wouldn't have the kind of time to be present for my kid the way she needed me. And so I decided to go the nonprofit route because I figured, if I can do the 9 to 5 thing, I can be a lot present for my daughter. And I really lucked up on being able to get a position with an excellent nonprofit where I learned quite a bit about coalitions, communities, community building, movement building. And so for me, it was like an extension of the education that I got at UCLA around race, right?
Wow.
Because now we're going from, the ivory tower to actually seeing what it looks like in practice, right? What fighting against racism and creating policy change and, policy shifts around some of the interests that we're passionate about, making those changes, seeing the societal differences that we want to see, seeing that actually happen in real time, right? Grassroots organizing, relationships with elected officials, and et cetera. After that, and this was around the time of George Floyd, and I think it felt like the perfect time for me to get back to looking at race in organizations, because there I was looking at race from a more policy standpoint. I think that this was a really strange roundabout way of addressing what I had experienced in my time as an attorney. Racism at work, bias, whether it's sexism or racism, as a person who lives in a body that's both Black and female, I experienced both. And being able to bring my lived experience to this work as a practitioner, looking at equity within organizations. So that's the long and short of how I got here.
It's so funny that you kind of hit points that Bonnie and I are both either working in the past or working currently with. We're both mothers. Our daughters are actually friends. And we both worked in a nonprofit. That's where we met.
Okay.
We worked with foster youth, providing them services that the state provided during their care and then after their care.
Okay.
So a lot of the same things that you're talking about in the education system, in policy, all these things we saw as a part of our workday.
Yeah.
We had probably the most passionate team. All of us were very focused on making sure that the kids were getting what they needed. So I hear you. And it really did kind of shape us into leaving there and taking a part of that advocacy with us into whatever it is that we did next. So for Bonnie, the work that she's doing as a therapist, I believe that, some of those notes come from the fact that we were able to be huge advocates.
Yes.
And we were able to take all those tropes that people are trying to put people in boxes and say, you don't have to be in that box here.
Yeah.
Right. And then for me, working with the career planning field, I had to change my title because people heard career coach and all they heard was resume.
Yeah.
And for me, it's about what happens after you submit that application. What happens after you get the job? There's still so much that you are grappling with internally that you aren't even talking about.
Yeah.
And who is the person that you go to for that?
Yeah.
Is me.
Yeah.
But you don't know it. So I love how you literally have taken all of your experiences and kind of melded them into something 100%. That you feel is a viable situation. 100%. So you kind of already talked about our issue, race in the workplace, and your personal lived experience with that. And you've kind of already talked a little bit about what, people are experiencing. Can you talk to me about how are you tackling that today? Yeah. What is it that you're offering now to kind of deal with what's happening with race in the workplace, with diversity and inclusion?
Yeah. So, a good deal of my work definitely includes, facilitating trainings and workshops to, bring people into awareness of, racism. That racism also takes place within workspaces, right? I think, there's often this misconception that schools or organizations or, different spaces are somehow separate from the society, right? That we walk into these
because
spaces.
that's where it's professional.
Exactly, right? So there's this this myth and this illusion that somehow these spaces are aren't susceptible to what's happening outside its doors, right? Which couldn't be further from the truth, right? And so, like I said, there are
people talk about it as though it is past tense.
Yeah,
those things aren't happening anymore. When literally that's where it's being
there's this researcher, I think she says something like organizations don't operate outside of society, they operate within society, right? And so the same types of harms that we see happening are happening within those walls, right? It just looks different. And so the key to going into these spaces is being able to name these different harms that people of color face within these spaces. It might not look like, physical violence, but there are these different forms of violence that take place within these spaces that often people struggle to name. Awful people struggle to even acknowledge that they're happening there, right? And so, in addition to bringing awareness to those harms and, figuring out ways, strategies, how to kind of shift the culture, make the changes needed to create a space that's a lot more welcoming for all types of people, whether it be based on race, gender, neurotype, disability, sexuality, all of those different identities that we bring to these spaces. In addition to trying to make these spaces more comfortable, my job is to come in and try to pinpoint some of the issues that are unique to this specific space, right? Because even though there are a lot of these, commonplace behaviors that happen to a lot of us everywhere, every organization has its own dynamic and has its own culture. So being able to pinpoint who are the actors who are perpetuating some of the problems in this space? What are some of the unique issues in this space that are problematic and that make certain students or staff feel unwelcome in these spaces? And so that's the fun part about the work for me, that I get to come into this space. I bring my lens as a researcher and the curiosity that comes with being a researcher to say, okay, let's start from zero. Because I want to be able to give you guys a baseline reading of where you are now so that we can talk about how to get to the goals that we're looking to get to, right?
And can you tell me, who is your target audience for the consulting that you're doing?
Yeah. So often my target audience is organizational leaders, right? They're the ones who do the hiring of the consultants. But at the end of the day, in terms of the educating and bringing awareness, the audience is everybody, right? Because even those of us who are people of color, who have these experiences, and we know that we're having these experiences, sometimes we struggle to name them, right? So being able to give folks the language and also give folks the voice to be able to say, this is what happens to me in this place. And so sometimes you need that safe container of having a facilitator in that space to be able to express those kinds of things. Because I'm sure you can imagine how precarious it is for people to be in a space that's already hostile. Folks are terrified of talking about their experiences. Besides the fact that often we have no training, we have no idea where to start. But the consequences and the implications of speaking out and being honest about what's happening to you in those places is hugely scary. And so I think that in addition to creating the kind of space for people to learn, it's also creating the kind of space for people to speak.
You're really giving people room for their voices to be heard. I love that.
Yeah, I feel like what I hear a lot from clients in session is about just validating, right? Like, yes, what you're describing to me is a microaggression or it's racism, and this is not okay. You're not imagining it, right? Like your experience is real, and you need permission almost to kind of talk about it.
You know, that's why I created the Fearless and Formidable Instagram account, because I feel like people needed the space to be able to see that you are not making this up. this is really happening to you. And let me tell you how I know it's really happening to you, because it happened to me. Right. And then to see other sisters come in and chime in and talk about their own experiences or the fact that it resonates for them, I think it's really validating, and it's important, because I think when you are fresh out of college or fresh out of, graduate school, med school, dental school, whatever, you don't know that this is a thing, right? I mean, I think you have like this vague understanding that institutions are racist, but you don't know precisely the way that racism gets enacted on you, because it's subtle. It's subtle.
Yeah.
And so being able to say, yeah, that icky feeling that you had, oh sis, you're not imagining that. That really happened.
Hey, podcast listener, this is Bonnie jumping in on this little break in the action to talk to you about advertising opportunities for this season of the podcast. So, my business, Mindful Kindness Counseling, is really proud to support this podcast and these conversations, both with my time, but also financially. And Tramelle and I want you to know that we are open to your advertising needs as well. So if you're interested in funding a spot on the podcast, please feel free to contact us at workandwellnesspodcast@gmail.com. Bye.
There was a post that you did, and it was a recapture of a video. And the young lady was talking about how she had worked at this organization, and she looked around and was the only person of color. She hadn't really noticed it before. She noticed that people were getting shifts of their preference. And when she asked about shifts of her preference, she wasn't being given that.
Yeah.
And so she didn't want to think the worst of it.
Yeah.
She tried her best to kind of go with the flow. Isn't that what we do? Go with the flow. And, I don't want to rock the boat. I'm just going to keep asking. I'm sure it's not what I may think it is.
Yeah.
Right. And then it wasn't until a friend of hers came to her and said, hey, man, I think the reason why this is happening is racism.
Yeah.
And she was like, wow, racism? You think that's funny?
Yeah.
And so she, went back and she didn't call them out.
Yeah.
In the form of racism, but what she said was, hey, I'm noticing a lot of people are getting the shifts that I'm asking for. I've got somebody who's happy to switch with me. Can we make that happen? And the person said no. And then after that, the backlash was that she was no longer on the schedule.
Yeah.
And that's how they do it, right? They don't tell you fired. They just, 3 weeks has gone by and we just haven't had a space for you in the schedule. And it wasn't until months had gone by, two months had gone by. I couldn't believe that she said this. She said 2 months had passed.
Yeah.
And she went back and said, am I fired? Because you guys haven't been putting me on the schedule. It's been 2 months. Listen, 2 days go by and on schedule, y'all done. All right, see you later. But 2 months. So what that tells me is people are out here experiencing things and doing their very best to tell themselves it's not what I think it is. I like to think of it as like the dust that accumulates. Because you don't realize something is dusty until time has passed, right? Maybe you're supposed to dust every Saturday. The first Saturday of the month, you had a date. So you went out, okay? And then maybe the second Saturday, you didn't dust because you were tired and you needed to rest. And then the third Saturday comes along, you're like, oh my goodness, there is a thick level of dust. What have I forgot all about, taking time to make sure this was being cleaned up as it accumulated. And I believe that racism is the same way. People have gotten really good at having these itty bitty subtleties that they can easily explain away. And so that they don't feel impactful around other people, but they do to the person who is experiencing them. But the person experiencing them does not feel like they have a big enough case with that one little piece of dust. And so they move on. And as it accumulates, they haven't kept the tally. They haven't kept up with all of the things. So then one day, it is just the smallest possible speck of dust that lands on an entire pile. And now they have issue and nobody understands why.
Girlfriend,
so if there are people out there,
you literally just defined microaggressions. You literally just did that. I have to steal that metaphor because it's perfect. I kid you not. That's literally what a microaggression is. It's just the everyday commonplace interactions, the subtle slights, the subtle insults, and they're so small by themselves that you can't say anything about it, right? Mm-hmm. But they add up and add up and add up.
Yes. Mm-hmm. So the two things that we want to make sure that we offer our listeners is we want to be able to not only call out the stuff that's happening for people, give them space to hear the resources and the kinds of conversations that are probably happening in their text box, right? And so that they see that these are real things. But we also want to make sure that we're giving them the opportunity to hear some type of solutions. So we really want to give in every episode some semblance of a short-term solution and a long-term solution. We know everybody can't fix everything with the snap of the finger. It just doesn't work like that. But we also understand that there has to be something to kind of kickstart some change for them. So for you, if I am a top level decision maker in my organization, and I'm seeing that there's some things I myself need to kind of stop this ship and move it around, what would you identify as, one, the short-term solution, and then two, what would be the long-term solution for that person?
So I think that when it comes to the organizational side of things, because, you know, part of the way I look at the work that I'm doing here is there's the organizational facing piece of my work, and there is the people of color facing aspect of the work, right? And so the DEI work that I do out in the field as a consultant, I'm working with the organizational facing piece of the work. But Fearless and Formidable, that is the space where I'm talking directly to Black women and other people of color and saying, look, sis, I see you. You know, these are some of the things that we need to talk about. So when we talk about the person facing part of the work, you know, I think that we have to be honest in understanding that there is that power imbalance, right? The corporations are the ones that have the jobs, right? They're the ones that have the money. They're the ones that do the decision making. And so what kind of strategies can we put in place, right? And so, you know, like we talked about earlier in the discussion with, you know, your approach to the work that you do is you don't have to stay at that job. You do not have to stay at that job, right? And so there's the how to navigate these spaces conversation. And then there's the how to get out of these spaces and navigate getting into a space that is more aligned with who you are, right? So I think, you know, that's the conversation when we're talking about folks, women, folks who might have a disability, you know, any marginalized identity. That's the conversation that you have.
Yes.
When it comes to top level executives, I think that, you know, some of the short-term solutions look like, I think the first thing any organization needs to be able to do in order to make the kinds of changes that they want to make is they have to make a commitment. They have to make a commitment that, hey, you know, diversity, equity, and inclusion, anti-racism, belonging, these types of things are institutional priorities. And they have to take it seriously. And they have to lead by example. And so in terms of short-term solutions, I think that's a perfect place to start. I think another one of the short-term solutions I often give when it comes to these spaces is you have to bring in the professionals who are here to expose these different practices, the policies that drive them, the cultural norms that, you know, normalize this kind of behavior within these spaces.
Yeah.
The people who are perpetuating the behavior, you have to be able to expose all that and get that to the fore, right? And so being able to bring someone in who has specialized training in doing that kind of work, I think that's another important short-term step. I think committing the resources needed to get the different types of programming off the ground is important. And I think also accountability is super important in this conversation.
You can say that one more time, really clearly for the folks in the back for us. I would appreciate it. One more time.
Yes, ma'am. So it's committing to anti-racism, DEI, and belonging. It's bringing in professionals. It's committing the resources, and it's taking accountability. Taking accountability is really key here, because if racism is just happening to people, if racism is just happening to people, but nobody's doing the racism, how that work? How that work, right? We have to be able to locate how this happens, right? Who's doing it? And often I think that, part of why it gets so difficult is that it's often invisible. It's often unspoken. It's often subtle. It's often unintentional. And so being able to educate folks about, I know you thought that this was harmless, but it isn't, right? And so making sure that you have whatever types of accountability structures in place for people to be able to have the conversations, to be able to bring to you that, hey, this is a thing that happens here and it's not working for us.
Exactly.
You have to have that container of accountability to be able to bring in the type of programming that you need, have the types of conversations that need to be had, identify the spaces that need to be built up, the supports, the resources, and etc., right?
Be sure to check out the show notes for more information on how to connect with and follow Dr. Tolu Wuraola.